When a woman kills her boyfriend, the world does not know quite where to put it. The grief does not fit the standard templates. The public sympathy that exists for other kinds of intimate violence does not automatically extend in this direction. The language is different. The courtroom arguments are different. Even the way investigators approach a scene is shaped by an assumption so deeply embedded it operates, almost invisibly. The assumption that in a relationship, when the killing happens, she is the one who was hurt. These 10 cases break that assumption in 10 different directions. Some of these women planned what they did for weeks, researching methods, constructing alibis, scouting locations. Some lost control in a single night and made a decision they could not take back. One filmed her boyfriend dying and went to bed. One drove at 100 miles per hour into a brick wall with him in the passenger seat. What they share is not a motive. What they share is the person who did not survive. Today, we are covering 10 daughters who killed their boyfriends, and what the courts decided to do with them. Case 1. Jodi Arias Travis Victor Alexander grew up in Riverside, California, the fourth of 7 children born to parents whose lives were defined by addiction. His father, Gary Alexander, and his mother, Pamela, were both heavy drug users. The children were moved between different homes, and different caretakers throughout their childhoods. And Travis and several of his siblings eventually went to live with their paternal grandparents, Norma and Cliff Alexander, who raised them in a stable environment and gave them a foundation that Travis carried into his adult life with visible pride. He became a devout member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which shaped his public identity entirely. He worked as a motivational speaker and a salesman for a company called Prepaid Legal Services, which sold legal insurance products, and he built a reputation within that company as someone who could fill a room and hold it. He was energetic, sociable, and charming by all accounts of people who knew him. He lived in a house at 11428 East Queensboro Avenue in Mesa, Arizona, a suburb of Phoenix, and by the spring of 2008 he was 30 years old, professionally ambitious, and preparing for a trip to Cancun, Mexico, that he had organized through his company's incentive program. He had planned to take a woman named Mimi Hall on the trip. Hall was a friend he had met through their shared church. He had taken her on one date. There had been no romantic connection, but they had remained friends, and the trip was a professional reward he wanted to share with someone he enjoyed being around. He never made it to Cancun. On June 4, 2008, he was murdered in his own bathroom. His body was not found until June 9. 5 days later, when a group of his friends forced open his bedroom door after he failed to appear for a scheduled conference call and stopped responding to messages entirely. What they found in the master bathroom sent several of them out of the house immediately. Travis Alexander was in the shower stall. He had been dead for 5 days in the Arizona summer heat. He had been stabbed 27 times across his torso, back and head. His throat had been cut so deeply that the wound nearly reached his spine. He had been shot once in the right temple with a .25 caliber handgun, the bullet coming to rest behind his left eye. The friend who called 911 told the operator that they thought they knew who was responsible. The name they gave was Jodi Arias. Jodi Ann Arias was born on July 9, 1980, in Salinas, California, and grew up in the town of Eureka in Northern California. She described her childhood as unhappy, characterized by physical discipline from her parents that she framed throughout the trial as abusive. She had not attended college and had worked a series of service jobs, waitressing and bartending at various points, and she had developed a genuine talent for photography that she pursued seriously. She was, by the description of people who encountered her before all of this happened, physically striking, socially confident, and romantically intense. She had been engaged once before. That engagement ended. Travis and Jodi met in September 2006 at a prepaid legal conference in Las Vegas, Nevada. They were introduced through mutual acquaintances in the sales network. The attraction was immediate and mutual, and within days of meeting, they became physically intimate. Jodi described the beginning of the relationship as intoxicating. Travis described it in similar terms to his friends. By November 2006, Jodi had converted to Mormonism and been baptized by Travis into the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. She moved from California to Mesa to be closer to him. They began a formal dating relationship in February 2007. The formal relationship lasted approximately 4 months before Travis ended it in June 2007. What followed the breakup was not a clean separation. Both of them continued to communicate, continued to see each other, and continued a physical relationship that Travis compartmentalized differently from how Jodi experienced it. Travis told his friends he was moving on, that he was dating other women, that Jodi was someone from his past. What he did not tell his friends, because it contradicted the version he was presenting publicly, was that he was still sleeping with Jodi when she visited, and still in regular contact with her by phone and text. Travis's friends noticed things they found disturbing. Women he dated after Jodi described strange incidents. Security alarms triggered at his house at odd hours. Tires on his car slashed in his driveway. His Facebook account accessed from outside his home. One woman he was seeing told friends she had felt she was being watched when she was at Travis's house. Travis told multiple people, including close friends, who later testified at trial, that Jodi had been going through his phone, reading his text messages without permission, and showing up at his house unannounced. He told one friend he had woken up in the middle of the night to find Jodi standing at the foot of his bed in his locked home, without any explanation of how she had got inside. He told another friend he believed she had slashed his tires. He described her in a text message sent in April 2008, using language that made his feelings explicit. The message told her she was the worst thing that had ever happened to him. He called her evil. Jodi moved back to Eureka in April 2008 to live with her grandparents. The physical distance did nothing to stop the contact. Phone records entered at trial showed that in the weeks leading up to the murder, Travis and Jodi were still speaking regularly by phone, sometimes in calls that lasted 40 minutes or more. Text messages passed between them constantly. The last voice communications between them was a phone call in the late hours of June 2, 2008. 2 days earlier, on May 28, 2008, a .25 caliber handgun had been reported stolen from Jodi's grandparents' home in Eureka. The theft was reported as a burglary. Investigators who examined the crime scene later found the entry point for the supposed break-in unconvincing, and formed the view that the theft had been staged. The gun was never recovered. The caliber of the bullet removed from Travis Alexander's skull during his autopsy was .25. On June 2, 2008, at 8:04 in the morning, Jodi Arias rented a white Ford Focus from Budget Rent-A-Car in Redding, California. She gave her destination as a pre-paid legal conference in Salt Lake City, Utah. Rental records showed she initially requested a red car, and when none were available, she was given the white one. Before leaving California, she stopped at the home of a former boyfriend named Daryl Brewer in Monterey, and borrowed 2 5-gallon gas cans from him. The following morning, June 3, she stopped at a Walmart in Salinas and purchased a third 5-gallon gas can, along with sunblock and facial cleanser. She filled all 3 cans with fuel at a station in Salinas. The prosecution's argument at trial was straightforward. The gas cans were there so that Jodi could drive through Arizona without stopping at petrol stations, leaving no credit card transactions, no surveillance footage, and no record that she had ever been in the state. Her phone was switched off before she crossed the Arizona border and remained off throughout the time she was in Mesa. It was switched back on after she had crossed back out of Arizona. She arrived at Travis Alexander's house sometime in the early morning hours of June 4. Travis's neighbor later recalled seeing an unfamiliar car parked outside. What happened inside the house between Jodi's arrival and the time the killing took place was reconstructed partly through physical evidence and partly through a digital camera found in Travis's washing machine. The camera had been placed there, the prosecution argued, by Jodi in an attempt to destroy the images stored on it. The attempt failed. Technicians recovered the photographs from the damaged memory card. The images showed Travis Alexander alive and well in his bathroom. In the early afternoon of June 4, photographs timed at approximately 1:40 in the afternoon, showing the two of them together. Further images showed Travis in the shower. The last photograph clearly showing him alive was timed at 5:29 in the afternoon. Two photographs taken seconds after that showed a blurred image that investigators identified as a body being dragged across bathroom tile, and a second image of the floor near the shower. The timestamps placed the killing at approximately 5:30 in the afternoon of June 4, 2008. Jodi left Mesa and drove to West Jordan, Utah, where she visited a man named Ryan Burns, a former co-worker and romantic interest. Burns later testified that she arrived at his home on June 5 in good spirits. He noticed that her hair, which had been blonde, was now dark brown. He noticed cuts on her hands. He testified that she told him she had cut herself on a broken glass. She stayed for approximately 2 days, attending a prepaid legal event, and then drove back to California, returning the rental car to the budget location in Redding on June 7. On June 9, Travis's friends found his body. Within hours of the 911 call, investigators had a name. Detectives spoke with Jodi on June 19. She told them she had not been in Arizona and had nothing to do with Travis's death. 2 weeks later, she gave a jailhouse interview to the television program Inside Edition, in which she changed her story, now claiming she had been present at the house but had witnessed 2 masked intruders breaking in and attacking Travis while she fled. In this version, she said she did not know who the attackers were. She told the program, "No jury is going to convict me." She was arrested on July 15, 2008, in Eureka, California. She was transported to Arizona and arraigned. Prosecutors filed a notice of intent to seek the death penalty on October 31, 2008. In 2010, 2 years after her arrest, Jodi changed her story for the final time. She now admitted to killing Travis, but said she had done it in self-defense after he attacked her. The trial began on January 2, 2013, in Maricopa County Superior Court before Judge Sherry Stevens. Lead prosecutor Juan Martinez was a Maricopa County veteran, known for a combative, aggressive courtroom manner. Defense attorneys Kirk Nurmi and Jennifer Wilmot led the defense. The trial was carried live on HLN and drew a national audience that grew over the following months, as the testimony became increasingly graphic and the proceedings increasingly extraordinary. The prosecution's case was built on the physical evidence and the sequence of lies. They argued the gas cans established premeditation. The stolen gun, same caliber as the murder weapon, never recovered, established premeditation. The switched-off phone during the Arizona portion of the drive established premeditation. The hair dye, changing her appearance before arriving in Mesa, established premeditation. The camera placed in the washing machine. And the return to Utah to establish an alibi with Ryan Burns established consciousness of guilt. The nature of the wounds, 27 stab wounds, followed by a near decapitation and a gunshot to the head, followed by physical evidence that at least one of the shots had been fired. After Travis was already on the ground, established that the killing was not a single panicked act of self-defense, but a sustained, deliberate, and lethal attack. Jodi took the witness stand on February 4, 2013, and testified for 18 days, longer than any murder defendant had testified in an Arizona court in living memory. She described a childhood marked by physical abuse from her parents. She described the relationship with Travis as one in which she was repeatedly manipulated, demeaned, and controlled. She alleged that Travis had told her he was sexually attracted to young children, a claim his family and friends categorically rejected and which produced visible distress in the courtroom gallery each time it was raised. She claimed he had physically assaulted her on multiple occasions, pushing her to the floor, kicking her in the ribs, and breaking one of her fingers during an argument. She claimed that on June 4, after a day in which they had spent hours together and taken the photographs on his camera, Travis had become enraged when she accidentally dropped that camera, that he had thrown her to the ground, and that she had grabbed a gun she claimed to have found in his closet and shot him once in the head in a moment of terror. She then claimed to have no memory of the stabbing, saying her recollection went dark after the gunshot and only returned when she found herself driving away from Mesa in a daze. The prosecution spent days dismantling this account during cross-examination. Martinez focused on specific details that were irreconcilable with the self-defense version. If the gunshot came first, in a moment of panicked defense, then the wound path and the nature of the other injuries were impossible to explain. The medical examiner testified that the gunshot wound showed characteristics inconsistent with being fired at close range from a struggling position. The stab wounds, particularly the wound to the throat, which was 7 inches long and nearly reached the spine, required sustained pressure and deliberate force. Travis's hands showed defense wounds, cuts across the palms and fingers, consistent with someone trying to ward off a blade, indicating he had been conscious and fighting back during at least part of the attack. The photographs from the camera placed Travis alive in the shower at 5:29 in the afternoon, which meant the sequence of events Jodi described, beginning with her dropping the camera and Travis attacking her, had to have occurred after that image was taken, and the prosecution pointed out repeatedly that at no point after Jodi left the house, after she drove to Utah, after she spent 2 days with Ryan Burns, after she returned her rental car and went back to Yreka, did she call the police, call an ambulance, or tell a single person what had happened. She called Travis's voicemail and left messages expressing concern for his well-being. She sent flowers and a letter to his grandmother. On May 8, 2013, the jury returned a guilty verdict on the charge of first-degree murder. They also found that the murder had carried out in an especially cruel manner, a finding that made Jodi eligible for the death penalty under Arizona law. The verdict was unanimous. What followed was 2 separate penalty phase proceedings, each ending in a hung jury. The first penalty jury deliberated and could not reach unanimity on whether to impose death. Judge Stevens declared a mistrial on the penalty phase. A second penalty jury was convened in 2014. That jury also deadlocked, with all but one juror reportedly in favour of death, but unable to obtain the unanimity the law required. Under Arizona statute, when 2 consecutive juries fail to agree on a death sentence, the death penalty is removed from the table, and the judge must choose between 2 remaining options: natural life in prison without the possibility of parole, or life in prison with the possibility of release after 25 years. On April 13, 2015, Judge Sherry Stevens held the final sentencing hearing. 4 members of Travis Alexander's family addressed the court. His sister Tanisha Sorensen spoke about the years of harassment her family had endured from supporters of Jodi Arias during and after the trial, describing people sending photographs of her brother's dead body and his autopsy images to her email and her social media accounts. She'd described the cruelty of that as something that compounded the grief that had already consumed her family's life. His sister Samantha Alexander told the court that Jodi Arias had decided to play the role of God and needed to suffer the consequences of her own actions. His sister Hillary Alexander said that she was trying to block her brother out of her memory because it hurt too much to remember him alive. Prosecutor Juan Martinez told the judge that Alexander's family wanted natural life, not because they wished to be vindictive, but because what had happened in that bathroom was a butchering. Jodi Arias addressed the court before the sentence was handed down. She gave a lengthy statement in which she expressed remorse while simultaneously disputing elements of what Alexander's family had said. She told the judge she was truly disgusted and repulsed with herself. She said that to that day she could not believe she had been capable of something so terrible. She said she wished she could take it back. Judge Stevens sentenced Jodi Arias to natural life in prison without the possibility of parole. The formal order read, "It is ordered that the defendant shall be incarcerated in the Department of Corrections for the rest of her natural life. No possibility of parole." As Arias was led from the courtroom, one of Travis's siblings could be heard shouting at her from the gallery. Court officers moved to quiet them. The gallery had been full for the entire proceedings, as it had been for much of the trial. Jodi Arias is currently incarcerated at the Arizona State Prison Complex at Perryville. In 2014, before the final sentencing, she was ordered to pay $32,000 in restitution to the Alexander family. Since 2022, prison records show she has worked as a library aide at the facility. Multiple appeals have been filed. All have been denied. In August 2025, she signalled publicly through legal filings that she intended to pursue further post-conviction relief, challenging the 2013 verdict, though no new proceedings had been initiated as of that date. Travis Alexander was 30 years old. He had a trip to Cancun booked for June 10, 2008, 6 days after he died. He had worked for years to build a career and a life out of a childhood that offered him very little to start with. His friends described him as someone who made a room better just by being in it. His family described the years between June 2008 and April 2015 as years in which they lived inside the case, with every ordinary day interrupted by a legal proceeding, a media cycle, a trial date, a penalty phase, another penalty phase, and always the photographs that strangers sent to Tanisha's accounts because they thought it was funny. There were no holidays in those years that did not carry the weight of what had happened. There were no milestones that were not shadowed. Travis Alexander's siblings grew older. Their brother did not. Before the next case, subscribe if this kind of deep research is what you're here for. It takes significant time to build these cases to this level of detail, and every subscription keeps it going. The next case is Mackenzie Shirilla, who was 17 years old when she drove her car at 100 miles per hour into a brick wall in a suburb of Cleveland, Ohio, with her boyfriend, Case 2. Mackenzie Shirilla Dominic Anthony Russo was born on September 24, 2001, and grew up in Strongsville, Ohio, a well-kept suburban community about 20 miles south of Cleveland. He came from a large family, the son of Christine and Frank Russo, and one of 7 siblings named Angelo, Christopher, Nicole, Christine, Michael, and Frank. His parents had divorced during his childhood, and he remained close to both sides of the family. By the time he was 20, he had already developed a clear entrepreneurial instinct. He had started his own clothing brand, and he had a music studio in his home where he and his friends would spend time making music and building things together. He was invested in cryptocurrencies and stocks at age when most people his age were still figuring out what they wanted. He played basketball. His family described him as funny, intelligent, and goal-oriented in equal measure. Someone who made a room better by being in it, and who kept people around him laughing. He had been in a relationship with a girl from his school since he was roughly 16 years old. Her name was Mackenzie Shirilla. Davian Markle Flanagan was born on March 11, 2003, and had come to Strongsville through a different path than most of his friends. He and his 2 younger sisters, Divine Isabella and Dahlia Rose, had a difficult early childhood. Their biological parents struggled with substance use disorder and were unable to care for them. The 3 children were in foster care before they were adopted at age 8 by Scott and Jamie Flanagan, who raised them in Strongsville. By the accounts of everyone who knew him, Davion was someone who made people feel seen. His adoptive father, Scott, later described him as someone who always made time for the people he cared about, who wanted everyone around him, including people he was not even close to feel included and wanted and appreciated. He had been a promising football player at Strongsville High School, a star on the team, until a torn ACL ended those aspirations near the end of high school. After that, he pivoted. He was in the process of applying to barber schools and had dreams of opening his own barber shop. He was also a rapper and songwriter who worked with Dominic Russo, who had the music studio. Davion Flanagan and Dominic Russo were friends. On the night of July 31, 2022, Davion was in the back seat of a car and had no idea why it was going where it was going. Mackenzie Shirilla was 17 years old in the summer of 2022, a recent graduate of Strongsville High School, and had been with Dominic since she was roughly 13 years old, which meant the relationship had run almost the entire length of her adolescence. She had built a modest presence on social media, posting content on TikTok, and presenting publicly as confident, social, and outgoing. She had an aunt, Candice, who testified at trial that she had spent time with the couple on July 28, 2022, just 3 days before the crash, and that during that time Dominic and Mackenzie had appeared very much in love and spoke openly about their future plans together. The prosecution did not dispute that the relationship had good periods. What it argued was that the bad periods had a specific and dangerous character that the good periods could not erase. Those tensions had a documented history that extended well beyond the 2 weeks before the crash. The two of them had moved in together after Mackenzie's graduation, a decision that brought the relationship into a new level of daily proximity. At the same time that the tensions within it were escalating, text messages obtained by investigators as part of the police investigation into the crash and later surfaced publicly revealed the emotional register in which parts of the relationship operated. In one exchange, Mackenzie told Dominic she was going to kill someone, that she just wanted to bang her head on the wall until she was dead. Other messages documented complaints about how he treated her during arguments, expressions of frustration that escalated into language about harming herself. Prosecutors argued at trial that these messages, read alongside the physical incidents, painted a picture of someone who had developed a volatile and increasingly dangerous attachment to a person who was trying to put distance between them. By June 2022, Dominic had reportedly told friends and family he was considering ending the relationship for good. That intention was known to people around him. What it produced, according to the prosecution, was a woman who was not willing to accept it. Dominic's mother Christine described watching the relationship grow more toxic in the months leading up to the crash, with the couple fighting more than ever. The prosecution documented a separate incident in which Mackenzie had allegedly threatened to key Dominic's car and had attempted to force her way into his home when he refused to let her in, damaging the door handle in the process. These incidents were presented as part of a pattern of controlling and threatening behavior that the prosecution argued had been building for months before it culminated in the early morning hours of July 31. The specific incident that became the most significant piece of prior threat evidence took place 2 weeks before the crash. Mackenzie was driving with Dominic and the car was moving when an argument broke out between them. A friend of Dominic's was either in the car or retrieved him shortly afterward and later testified to what had been said. What the friend heard Mackenzie say while the car was moving was that she was going to wreck the car right now. She was shouting it. Dominic called his mother from inside the car, asking for someone to come and get him. The friend retrieved him. The incident passed without consequence. 2 weeks later, Dominic Russo was dead. That morning, Dominic Russo, Davion Flanagan, and Mackenzie Shirilla had been out together at a graduation gathering for a friend in the area. All three of them had smoked marijuana at the party before leaving. Mackenzie was behind the wheel of her 2018 Toyota Camry. Davion Flanagan was in the back seat. He was 19 years old, a friend of Dominic's, someone who made people feel included and appreciated, someone who had been adopted at 8 years old, and had built a life in Strongsville, and had plans to cut hair and make music and do the things young people with their whole lives ahead of them do. He had no role in the conflict between Mackenzie and Dominic. He was simply in the car. At approximately 5:30 in the morning, Mackenzie turned down Alameda Drive in Strongsville. a 3/4-mile stretch of road through a quiet business park that terminated near the exterior wall of the Plidco building, a large commercial brick structure. A surveillance camera mounted on the building recorded what happened next. In the footage, which was played in its entirety during the bench trial, and which the judge later described as the most significant single piece of evidence in the case. The headlights of the Camry are visible at the far end of the road. The car is moving. It continues to move. It does not slow down. It does not veer. It accelerates directly into the wall of the building at 97 to 100 miles per hour. The impact is complete and instantaneous. The footage ends on the collapsed remains of the car. Judge Nancy Margaret Russo, who later described the footage as the kind of evidence you can never unsee, said it showed not a driver losing control, but a driver executing a plan. She had a mission, the judge said, and she executed it with precision. The mission was death. When emergency responders arrived approximately 45 minutes after the crash, they found all 3 occupants unconscious and trapped inside the wreckage. The car structurally destroyed with full airbag deployments. Dominic Russo and Davion Flanagan were pronounced dead at the scene. Mackenzie Shirilla was extracted from the vehicle and airlifted to hospital, where she underwent multiple surgeries. She survived. The investigation into what had happened began immediately. Investigators examined the car's event data recorder, the onboard device embedded in modern vehicles that logs throttle input, braking, and speed in the seconds preceding a collision. What the recorder showed was unambiguous. In the 4.6 seconds before impact, the accelerator pedal was being pushed down at full capacity. The brake had not been applied at any point. The Ohio State Highway Patrol's Crash Reconstruction Unit testified that the vehicle was traveling at 97 miles per hour on a 35-mile-per-hour road in the moments before it left the roadway. No mechanical failure was identified. The car functioned exactly as designed. Investigators also established something that the judge would later flag specifically in her verdict. The route Mackenzie took that morning, turning onto Alameda Drive through the business park, was not a route she would have travelled routinely. It was not on the way home from where they had been that night. It was an uncommonly quiet stretch of road, particularly at 5:30 in the morning. And in the days before the crash, surveillance footage from the area showed Mackenzie's car had driven past that same location. The judge's reading of this was explicit. Mackenzie alone made the decision to drive the car, to drive an obscure route, a route she visited a few days before, and a route not routinely taken by her. Mackenzie Shirilla was arrested on November 4, 2022, approximately 3 months after the crash. She was 18 years old at the time of her arrest. She was charged with 4 counts of murder, 4 counts of felonious assault, 2 counts of aggravated vehicular homicide, 1 count of drug possession, and 1 count of possessing criminal tools. Under Ohio law, a vehicle used with intent to cause serious harm or death constitutes a criminal tool. She pleaded not guilty. She elected a bench trial, meaning the verdict would be decided by a judge alone, rather than a jury. The trial was heard by Cuyahoga County Common Pleas Judge Nancy Margaret Russo, who shares a surname with the victim entirely by coincidence, and who noted that fact formally at the outset of proceedings. The defense presented a medical argument. Mackenzie's attorneys argued that she suffered from a condition called postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, known as POTS, which is a blood circulation disorder that can cause episodes of lightheadedness and fainting. Her mother Natalie testified that Mackenzie had fainted on previous occasions. The defense used this to argue that what happened on Alameda Drive could have been a medical episode rather than an act of murder, that she may have lost consciousness at the wheel and been unable to brake. They also argued more broadly that intent could not be proven and that the case should result in a conviction for reckless driving rather than murder. The defense pointed to Mackenzie's aunt's testimony, to the evidence of the couple making future plans days before the crash, and to the argument that the relationship's volatility ran in both directions, and should not be reduced to a single interpretation. The prosecution dismantled the medical argument through the data recorder evidence and the surveillance footage. A fainting episode does not cause the accelerator to be pressed harder. A loss of consciousness does not produce a trajectory that follows a straight line at increasing speed directly into a wall at the end of a road the driver had visited beforehand. The prosecution also introduced the testimony about the prior threats, including the specific incident 2 weeks earlier in which Mackenzie had said she would wreck the car while Dominic was in it, and the text messages that documented the emotional volatility of the relationship in the months leading up to that morning. On August 14, 2023, Judge Nancy Margaret Russo delivered her verdict from the bench. She read it aloud in full. Her language was precise, and her assessment was absolute. She said that Sharilla's actions had been controlled, methodical, deliberate, intentional, and purposeful. She said, "There could be no doubt about the absolute terror of the two people in that car in the final seconds of their lives." She said, "The surveillance footage showed the purpose and intent of the defendant clearly, and that she had chosen a course of death and destruction." She used the phrase "literal hell" on wheels to describe what she saw in the footage of Mackenzie Shirilla accelerating toward the Plidco building, and she concluded with the statement that was carried in coverage of the case around the country. This was not reckless driving. This was murder. Mackenzie Shirilla broke down in tears as the verdict was read. She was convicted on all 12 counts. The sentencing hearing took place 1 week later, on August 21, 2023. Mackenzie addressed the court before her sentence was handed down and read a prepared statement in which she said she was so deeply sorry to the families of Dominic and Davion. The families of both victims were present. Davion's sister Divine delivered a victim impact statement in which she said she felt stuck, unable to move forward and lost. She said she had known Mackenzie for about 3 years and that she had always been someone who took the easy way out. She asked the court to give Mackenzie the longest possible sentence. Christine Russo, Dominic's sister, later described publicly what it had been like to sit through the proceedings and to watch the Netflix documentary that revisited the case 4 years later. She said Shirilla was rotten to the core. Dominic's father, Frank Russo, gave a statement to reporters after the sentencing that was notable for its restraint. He said he had lost his son, that it was harder on his family than he could express, but that he did not want the rest of Mackenzie's life ruined either. He called her a kid who did a damn stupid thing. His generosity in that moment, standing outside a courtroom where his son's killer had just been sentenced to life in prison, said something that no other part of the proceedings did. Judge Russo sentenced Mackenzie Shirilla to 2 concurrent terms of 15 years to life in prison, one for each of the 2 murder convictions. She also received a lifetime suspension of her driver's license. She was 19 years old at sentencing. Shirilla's lawyers filed appeals. The 8th District Court of Appeals upheld the conviction in September 2024. A subsequent appeal to the Ohio Supreme Court was declined in 2025, the court refusing to accept jurisdiction to hear the case. A further appeal in March 2026 was denied after it was determined to have been filed 1 day past the 365-day jurisdictional deadline under Ohio law, a procedural failure that effectively closed that avenue entirely. In the aftermath of the Netflix documentary, Dominic's sister Christine launched a petition called Dom's Law, pushing Ohio legislators to modernize the state's Son of Sam law, which prevents criminals from profiting from their crimes. Christine argued that the law was written in the 1970s and covered book deals and news articles, but had not been updated to account for social media, TikTok, YouTube, and crowdfunding. She said Shirilla had been obsessed with being social media famous from the beginning, and that the existing law left a digital loophole that allowed convicted violent offenders to build platforms from notoriety. The petition named the law in honor of both Dominic Russo and Davon Flanagan. Mackenzie Shirilla is currently incarcerated at the Ohio Reformatory for Women in Marysville. State prison records indicate her first parole hearing is scheduled for September 2037, 15 years after the crash. A Netflix documentary about the case called The Crash, which premiered in May 2026, became the #1 streaming film on the platform for several days after its release, drawing the case back into widespread public attention nearly 4 years after the morning on Alameda Drive. Dominic Russo was 20 years old. He had a clothing brand and a music studio and 7 siblings and plans. Davian Flanagan was 19. He had been adopted at 8 years old by people who loved him, and he had grown into someone who made everyone around him feel wanted and appreciated. And he had a dream about cutting hair, and a sister who called him her role model. Neither of them had any knowledge of where that car was going. The route was not one they would have asked her to take. The time of mourning, the emptiness of the road, the building at the end of it, the fact that she had been there before. None of that was visible to the 2 people in the passenger seats. By the time it was visible, there were 4.6 seconds left. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next case is Sarah Boone, who locked her boyfriend inside a suitcase in their Florida apartment, recorded him begging for help, and went to bed. Case 3. Sarah Boone Jorge Torres Jr. was 42 years old and weighed approximately 103 pounds. He was a slight man, described by his family as warm and affectionate, someone who kept people close to him and who, despite the turbulence of his relationship with Sarah Boone, stayed tethered to her through 4 years of a dynamic that police records document as volatile in both directions. He had children. He had a mother named Blanca Can and a sister named Victoria who would later stand in a Florida courtroom and describe what the world looked like after he was gone. He lived with Sarah Boone in a shared apartment in Winter Park, Florida, in the early months of 2020, and on the night of February 23 into the morning of February 24. He died inside a blue suitcase, while the woman he lived with stood on the other side of the zip and told him it was what he deserved. Sarah Boone was born on October 17, 1971, and by 2016 she and Jorge Torres Jr. had begun a relationship that the court record and the police call log would come to document in considerable detail. The relationship between them involved documented physical altercations running in both directions. Police were called to their shared home on multiple occasions. Torres was arrested for battery against Boone 4 separate times, and in each instance Boone bailed him out of jail. In July 2018, both of them were charged with battery against each other following a single incident. In 2019, there were 3 separate battery arrests involving Torres, including one stemming from an incident in which Boone alleged that Torres had punched her in the ear and the side of her head. There was also an incident at a bar, in which Boone said Torres became agitated when another man asked her for a cigarette, leading to a fight when they returned home. Torres gave his own account of at least one of these incidents, stating that Boone had placed both of her hands around his throat and applied pressure until he had difficulty breathing, and that he had kicked her in an attempt to get her to stop. The police records from these years do not paint a picture of an ordinary partnership. They paint a picture of a relationship that had been physically dangerous for both of the people in it, repeatedly and on the record. By February 2020, the 2 of them had been together for approximately 4 years and were living together in Winter Park. On the evening of February 23, they had been drinking wine at home. Boone would later tell police that at some point during the evening they both thought it would be funny to see whether Jorge, who was very small, could fit inside the blue suitcase they had in the apartment. She said he climbed in voluntarily. She said the whole thing was a game, a piece of playful stupidity that went wrong, because she passed out before letting him out. The videos on her phone told a different story. When Orange County Sheriff's Office detectives obtained Sarah Boone's phone following her arrest on February 25, they found 2 cell phone videos she had recorded the previous night. She later said she did not remember filming them. She told detectives she blamed the alcohol. The videos were played in their entirety at trial in October 2024, and they became the central evidence in the case against her. In the first video, the suitcase is on the floor. It is moving. Jorge Torres Jr. is inside it, pushing against the walls of the bag, and he can be heard calling her name. He tells her he cannot breathe. He says it plainly, directly. He cannot breathe. Boone's response, audible on the recording, was to laugh. She told him that was what he did when he choked her. She said that was what it felt like when he cheated on her. She said for everything he had done to her. She called him stupid. At one point, as he continued to call her name, she told him that was her name and not to wear it out. Torres kept saying he could not breathe. Boone kept responding on camera that it was on him. In the second video, the suitcase had been moved into a different position, flipped upside down, and Torres was still inside, still pushing against the walls, still saying he could not breathe. Boone's voice on the second video continued in the same register as the first. At some point after filming those videos, Sarah Boone went upstairs and went to sleep. She called 911 at 1:01 in the afternoon on February 24. Approximately 12 to 14 hours after the videos were filmed, she told the dispatcher that her boyfriend was dead. She described the previous night as a hide-and-seek kind of thing. She said she had passed out and woken up and found him unresponsive inside the suitcase. She said he had blood coming from his mouth. She said he was purple. She said she had tried CPR and nothing happened. When Orange County deputies arrived at the apartment, they found Jorge Torres Jr. dead in the suitcase. The medical examiner performed an autopsy and determined the cause of death to be positional asphyxia, meaning he had suffocated as a result of his body being confined in a position that prevented adequate breathing over an extended period of time. The autopsy also documented injuries inconsistent with Boone's account of a playful game, including injuries consistent with blunt force trauma. Prosecutors later presented evidence that Boone had struck Torres with a baseball bat before leaving him in the suitcase. Though Boone denied this, the physical findings at autopsy supported the prosecution's contention that the night was not what she described. Boone was arrested on February 25, 2020. What followed was one of the more procedurally unusual pretrial periods in any Florida murder case in recent memory. Over the course of 4 years between her arrest and her eventual trial, Boone cycled through a total of 13 different attorneys. Several of them withdrew, citing irreconcilable differences and adversarial working relationships. Some were fired by Boone herself. The presiding judge, Michael Kranick, noted formally in 2024 that as of late June of that year, the case had been pending for 4 years, 3 months, and 5 days, and expressed the view that the pattern of attorney replacements was being used as a mechanism to delay proceedings. A point was eventually reached at which Boone forfeited her right to counsel and was required to represent herself, until a final defense attorney, James Owens, was appointed and remained through the trial. Before trial began, Boone was offered a plea deal that would have seen her sentenced to 15 years in prison for manslaughter rather than face a second-degree murder charge and the possibility of life. She rejected it. The trial began in October 2024. The defense argument was that Boone had suffered from battered spouse syndrome as a result of years of abuse by Torres, and that this history shaped the context of what happened on the night of his death. Owens argued that the relationship had been violent, and that Torres had himself committed documented acts of physical violence against Boone. He argued that the events of February 23 needed to be understood within that history rather than in isolation. Boone took the stand and testified for approximately 5 hours, describing in detail what she characterized as years of being kicked, punched, spat on, stabbed, choked, and raped by Torres. She said she forgave herself for falling in love with a monster. She said no matter how grotesque he had become, she had still loved him and hoped and forgiven. The prosecution's counter-argument was the videos. Whatever the history of the relationship, whatever violence had passed between them in prior years, the videos showed what happened on the night Jorge Torres Jr. died. They showed a man locked in a confined space, unable to breathe, calling her name, begging to be let out, and they showed Sarah Boone on the other side of the zip, choosing to taunt him, bringing up grievances about infidelity and past abuse, and then going upstairs and going to sleep. The state argued that Boone had acted with malicious intent and had used the suitcase as a means of punishing Torres for things she believed he had done to her. The prosecution noted that she had willingly handed her phone to investigators, almost certainly having forgotten what she had recorded on it the night before. The jury deliberated briefly before returning a guilty verdict on October 25, 2024. Sarah Boone was convicted of second-degree murder. The sentencing hearing took place on December 2, 2024. Jorge Torres's family addressed the court before the sentence was delivered. His mother, Blanca Torres, told the judge in a tearful statement that Boone had not only killed her son, she had killed a father, a brother, and an uncle. She said that sometimes, when she looked out the window, she was still waiting for him to come home and tell her he loved her. His sister, Victoria Torres, said that Boone had caused a lifetime of pain. Boone spoke before the sentence was handed down. She repeated her allegations about Torres's behaviour and described the relationship in terms consistent with her trial testimony. She asked for forgiveness from Torres and from his family. Judge Kranick denied the defence's motion for a new trial and sentenced Sarah Boone to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She was 52 years old at sentencing. She was transferred to the Florida Women's Correctional Center in Ocala in the weeks following the sentencing hearing to begin serving her sentence. Jorge Torres Jr. was 42 years old. He weighed 103 pounds. He was small enough to fit inside a blue suitcase. On the night of February 23, 2020, inside an apartment in Winter Park, Florida, he called the name of the woman he lived with repeatedly from inside a zipped bag and told her he could not breathe. She filmed it. She laughed at him. Then she went to bed. His mother still looks out the window sometimes. He does not come. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next case is Ana Trujillo, who beat her boyfriend to death with the heel of her own shoe in a Houston high-rise, and then answered the door when police arrived with blood on her hands. Case 4. Ana Trujillo Alf Stefan Anderssons was born in Sweden and had spent decades building a career in biomedical research before arriving in Houston in December 2009. He was a specialist in women's reproductive health, working as a visiting professor at the University of Houston's Center for Nuclear Receptors and Cell Signaling. Before joining the University of Houston, he had spent 14 years as an associate professor at UT Southwestern Medical Center in Dallas. He had become a naturalized United States citizen in the 1990s, while maintaining his Swedish citizenship. He was 59 years old in the summer of 2013, private by nature, focused on his work, and described by colleagues and close friends as someone who was genuinely curious about other people, who listened to anyone, and who was, in the estimation of his close friend Annika Lundqvist, partly so popular because of that quality. He liked bars. He drank more than he should have. He lived alone in a high-rise condominium in Houston's Museum District, a building called the Park Lane on Binns Street, with a view toward Herman Park. He was, on almost every account available in the public record, from people who knew him, gentle, mild-mannered, and not a man who raised his hand to anyone. Ana Lilia Trujillo was 45 years old in the summer of 2013. She had grown up in Mexico and had lived in Houston for some years. She had been married, had 2 children who were living with their father, and had a lifestyle that one source present at trial described as involving the Houston nightlife circuit and a pattern of moving between men she met there, staying with them for periods before the relationship ended and the next one began. She had prior legal involvement in Texas, including a 2010 drunk driving case noted in court documents. She was physically striking and socially confident in the kinds of settings that made people notice her. The account of how Trujillo and Andersson met varies between sources in the level of detail, but the consistent version is that they encountered each other in or near the Park Lane high-rise, socialised, and began a relationship that was described by prosecutors at trial as contentious, on again, off again, and marked by a volatility that ran primarily from Trujillo toward Anderson, rather than the reverse. Whether Anderson had officially ended the relationship before the night of his death is a question the trial addressed. The prosecution's framing was that he had tried to create distance from Trujillo earlier in 2013, before the two reconciled in June of that year, which placed the killing within weeks of a reconciliation that was apparently still fragile. On the night of June 8, into the early morning of June 9, 2013, Stefan Anderson and Ana Trujillo were out together at a bar. The cab driver who drove them home that night testified at trial. The testimony was specific and damaging. The driver told jurors that Trujillo was angry and yelling throughout the entire cab ride back to Anderson's building, that she was out of control, and that the situation in the vehicle was sufficiently alarming that a woman named Gomez, who appears in trial accounts as a witness either inside or near the cab, told Anderson directly that he needed to be careful, that his friend was out of control. Anderson, according to the same testimony, took Gomez's hand, squeezed it, and told her he would be okay. Gomez was reportedly so worried that she got out of the cab herself, held Anderson's hands, and prayed for him before he went inside. That was the last time anyone outside the apartment saw him alive. Shortly before 4 in the morning on June 9, 2013, Houston Police Department officers responded to a 911 call from the Park Lane high-rise. The call had been made by Ana Trujillo. In the 911 recording, she was hysterical, crying, barely coherent. She told the dispatcher he was about to die. When officers arrived at the condominium, Trujillo answered the door. She had blood on her clothes and blood on her hands. Behind her in the hallway of the apartment, Stefan Anderson was lying on his back, on the floor. He was dead. He had been struck 25 times in the face, the head, and the arms with the stiletto heel of Ana Trujillo's shoe. The shoe was found beside his body. It was a blue suede closed-toe pump, size 9, with a 5.5-inch heel. Paramedics who arrived at the scene were unable to save him. He had bled to death on his own floor. The wound pattern documented by the medical examiner was central to the prosecution's case. The 25 separate impact points were concentrated across Anderson's face and head. His hands and wrists bore defensive wounds, cuts and bruising consistent with someone raising their hands and arms to protect their face from a sustained attack. The prosecution's reconstruction of the crime, demonstrated in court using a dummy, was that Anderson had been injured and fallen on his back, and that Trujillo had then sat or positioned herself on top of him to prevent him from getting up, and struck him repeatedly with the heel of her shoe while he lay beneath her. This sequence was not consistent with a brief defensive act of self-protection in a mutual struggle. It was consistent with sustained, targeted, lethal force applied to a man who was already on the ground. Trujillo was arrested on June 10, 2013, the day after the killing. She was charged with murder and held on a bond of $100,000, which she made, and remained out of custody in the months before her trial. The trial began in late March 2014, approximately 9 months after the killing. The defense was led by attorney Jack Carroll. The prosecution was led by a team that included John Jordan and Sarah Mickelson. The framing from both sides was established in opening statements and carried consistently through the 2 weeks of proceedings. The prosecution described Anderson as mild-mannered, quiet, and non-violent by the testimony of everyone who knew him. They described Trujillo as hot-tempered, aggressive, and with a documented history of violent behavior toward other people in her life that predated this relationship. They were explicit that Ana Trujillo was not a victim. They told the jury that she had struck Stefan Anderson 25 times with the heel of her shoe while he lay on the floor and bled out. To support the history of violence claim, prosecutors called 2 witnesses who had personal knowledge of Trujillo's behavior in the 2 weeks immediately preceding the murder. The first was James Wells, who had been in a romantic relationship with Trujillo around the same period. Wells testified that Trujillo had, in an unprovoked attack, bitten him on the head, pulling skin from his skull with her teeth, and then told him, "You're a dead man." The second was a woman named Chanda Ellison, who had been romantically involved with Wells, and who testified that Trujillo had attacked her in her own home, forcing her to use a stick to fend off the assault. Both incidents were described as occurring approximately 2 weeks before Stefan Anderson was killed. The prosecution used this testimony to establish that the night of June 8 was not an isolated episode of Trujillo losing control. The pattern existed before it. The defense's argument acknowledged that Anderson was dead, and that Trujillo had struck him with her shoe, but attributed the killing to self-defense. Carroll told jurors that Anderson was an alcoholic whose drinking had made him increasingly dangerous and unpredictable. He argued that on the night of the killing, Anderson had attacked Trujillo first. He pointed to Anderson's drinking problem as the cause of his aggression, and argued that Trujillo, significantly smaller than Anderson, had reached for the closest object available to defend herself. This argument ran into the physical evidence. Trujillo had no injuries consistent with having been physically attacked. She had no marks on her face, no bruising on her body, no wounds that aligned with someone who had just been attacked by a man in a violent rage. Anderson's wounds told the opposite story. His hands and wrists showed that he had tried to protect himself. His face bore 25 separate impact points delivered by a spiked heel, which requires the person striking to be positioned above the person being struck, not beside them in a struggle of equals. The prosecution made this point throughout the trial. The one thing they told jurors they could be certain of was that Ana Trujillo was not the victim in that apartment. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning a guilty verdict on April 8, 2014. The speed of the deliberation, under 2 hours in a murder trial with a self-defense argument, was noted in multiple accounts of the verdict. Trujillo showed little visible emotion when the verdict was read. She was taken into custody at the courthouse. The punishment phase that followed lasted 3 more days. Trujillo took the stand during the punishment phase and testified for 6 hours. She described a personal history that included being sexually assaulted by her first husband, having a miscarriage after another boyfriend kicked her in the stomach, and being attacked by a friend in 2009 who she said had tried to rape her, an incident from which she said she had defended herself using a candlestick as a weapon. She described a history of being victimized by men across her adult life. She described Anderson as someone she had loved deeply, someone she had wanted to get better, and said when asked why she had not left the relationship, "Because I loved him and I wanted him to get better. I wanted him to stop drinking so much." The defense also called a licensed professional counselor named Julia Babcock, who testified in support of a mitigating theory of sudden passion, which under Texas law carries a significantly reduced sentencing range. Sudden passion is a legal concept, meaning that the defendant acted under an immediate influence of terror so extreme as to render the mind incapable of cool reflection. Babcock testified that while the relationship between Trujillo and Anderson was not itself abusive, Trujillo had suffered abuse in prior relationships that had left her prone to overreaction in perceived threatening situations. The prosecution cross-examined Babcock on the definition of an overreaction and on the question of whether 25 strikes with a stiletto heel to the face and head of a man already on the ground could reasonably be described under that framework. The jury deliberated for over 5 hours on the punishment question before rejecting the sudden passion mitigating claim entirely. On April 11, 2014, they returned a recommendation of life in prison. Under Texas law, the life sentence in a murder conviction carries a mandatory minimum of 30 years before parole eligibility. Ana Trujillo was 45 years old at sentencing. She will not be eligible for her first parole consideration until she is at least 75 years old. After the judge pronounced the sentence, Trujillo sat down and cried. Her mother was in the courtroom gallery and was also sobbing. Anderson's friends and colleagues, several of whom had travelled to the proceedings and had spoken to media throughout the trial about who he had been, watched the sentencing from the gallery. Anderson's close friend Annika Lundqvist had described him publicly as someone who made himself available to anyone who needed to talk, as someone who made rooms easier to be in. His friends had hoped throughout the trial that the proceedings would give the public an accurate picture of who he was rather than who the defense had tried to portray him as. The verdict gave them that, at least in part, a decade after the killing. Trujillo spoke to reporters from the Gatesville Correctional Facility, located approximately 200 miles northwest of Houston, where she is currently serving her sentence. Her account remained unchanged. She told them it had just happened, that it was an accident, that it had got to a point where she had to defend herself, and that she hated having to say that. She said she loved the man and cared deeply for him. Stefan Andersson was 59 years old. He had moved to the United States from Sweden in the 1980s and spent more than 3 decades building a career in biomedical research, working specifically on conditions that affected women's reproductive health. He had joined the University of Houston faculty in 2009. He had colleagues who thought carefully about him before speaking, a close friend who described the quality of his listening as the thing that made him so wide-liked, and a group of people in the courtroom gallery during a 2-week murder trial in 2014 who sat through the daily accounts of his final hours and waited for the jury to finish deliberating. He had a drinking problem that his friends acknowledged. He had never, in the account of any person who knew him, laid a hand on anyone in anger. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next case is Lindsay Haugen, who strangled her boyfriend of less than a month in the parking lot of a Walmart in Montana, and told detectives on a recorded video that she had kind of just wanted to know what it felt like to kill someone with her bare hands. Case 5, Lindsay Haugen Robert Glenn Mast was born in May 1990 in St. Petersburg, Florida, and by the time he was 25 years old had been living a transient life for the better part of 7 years. He had left home at 18 and taken to the road in the way that some young men do, hopping freight trains, hitchhiking, moving through states, and taking seasonal work when it came up. His stepmother, Mindy Pendleton, who had raised him since he was 2 years old, described him at his killer's sentencing hearing as a traveller, someone who had spent his life going state to state, someone who made different choices from the rest of the family, but who was, in her words, a good man. He had brown eyes, he had a tattoo of a skateboard-riding dinosaur on his right hand. He played guitar, he told stories. When he was around, people knew it. His nieces and nephews called out choo-choo whenever they heard a train whistle, because that was how much Robert Mast loved trains. Pendleton had marks on the walls of her Florida home, showing his height through the years, the way parents and grandparents measure children, the record of someone growing. He struggled with substance abuse and alcoholism, by his family's account, and there were periods in his life that were hard. But he was 25 years old in the summer of 2015, and he was passing through Billings, Montana, on his way toward whatever was next. He had a girlfriend he planned to return to in Minnesota. He had family who loved him and tracked his movements as best they could across the country, and waited for him to come home for the holidays. On August 20, 2015, Robert Mast attended a house party in the Billings area. Lindsay April Haugen was also at that party. Haugen was 32 years old at the time, and by the summer of 2015 her personal life had been shaped by a series of circumstances that her defense counsel and mental health witnesses would later lay out in detail for the sentencing court. She had grown up in Portland, Oregon, in a religious household and had begun using drugs as a teenager, reaching heroin addiction by the age of 16 before stopping when she found herself pregnant at 17. She had gone back to her family after that and joined the National Guard, where she served for 10 years, including a period volunteering to serve in Kuwait as a gunner on a Black Hawk helicopter. By her own account, she was, in professional terms at least, someone who had found structure and direction. Her personal relationships had not provided the same. In 2013, while she was still serving, she had entered a relationship with a man who subjected her to sustained and documented abuse. The clinical, professional counsellor who testified at her sentencings described the catalogue of what that relationship involved. The man beat her, he raped her, he broke her hand and broke her nose during separate incidents. He strangled her until she lost consciousness. He threw her against a bathtub. On one occasion, he threw her keys onto a roof when she tried to leave, trapping her. When she reported the abuse to her commanding officer, the National Guard kept her in the barracks for her own protection. Even then, she made attempts to maintain contact with him. He was sent to prison for the abuse in June 2015, approximately 2 months before Lindsay Haugen met Robert Mast at a house party. Haugen described the moment she saw Mast at that party in the terms she used when later speaking about it on camera. She remembered a beautiful smile sitting in a pile of empty beer cans on the floor, shirtless with dreadlocks, what she described as just very carefree. She said there was an instant connection. Mast treated her well. He was warm and unguarded. She was, by her own account, falling for someone for the first time in years, without the overlay of fear that had defined her most recent relationship. She also offered him somewhere to stay, and he told her he needed to keep moving. They agreed to travel together. They set off from Washington State, heading toward North Dakota, where both of them were looking for work. Mast had been dealing with depression and suicidal ideation, according to his family, and to Haugen's account of the time they spent together. The family acknowledged he had struggled with these things. Haugen said that as they travelled, Mast talked about wanting to die, that he expressed it directly and repeatedly, and that eventually he asked her to help him end his life. The prosecution's position, stated plainly in the sentencing proceedings, was that the evidence did not support the mercy-killing framing, and that what happened in the Walmart parking lot was not what Haugen said it was. The judge who sentenced her described Robert Mast as not an abuser, not someone that would trigger a fatal reaction. He reviewed the available evidence and stated explicitly that everything he had pointed away from Mast, being the kind of person who would ask to be killed, and toward Haugen having reasons of her own. One of those reasons, acknowledged by Haugen herself in a later account, was jealousy. During the time they spent together on the road, Haugen learned that Mast had been in contact with an ex-girlfriend. She acknowledged this had bothered her. On the evening of September 15, 2015, the two of them were parked in the lot of the Walmart in the Billings Heights area. They had eaten pizza and drunk wine in the car together. At some point during that evening, Lindsay Haugen put her arm around Robert Mast's neck and choked him. When he lost consciousness, she held her hands over his mouth and nose for as long as 20 minutes to make sure he was dead. Court documents are specific about this detail. The choking alone was not what killed him. The 20 minutes of covering his airway after he stopped resisting was. Mast fought the strangulation. The judge at the sentencing described him as foaming at the mouth. When Haugen was certain he was dead, she drove 8 blocks before pulling over to attempt CPR. A police officer knocked on her window. She confessed to the killing immediately. She was arrested and taken in for questioning. The interrogation was recorded on video and would become the most significant piece of evidence in the case. Not because it documented the mechanics of the crime, but because of what Haugen said during it. She gave the initial account of the mercy killing, the love-driven act she said Mast had asked her to carry out. The lead detective told her directly that he did not believe her, and then Haugen said something that was caught on the recording. and would be replayed in courtrooms and on a Netflix documentary. And before a parole board for years afterward, she told him that she had kind of just wanted to kill someone with her bare hands, honestly. She said she saw her opportunity. There was a third detail from the interrogation that received less attention than that statement, but was disclosed by the investigating detective Steve Hallam at the January 2025 clemency hearing. Hallam told the parole board that in the same recorded interrogation, Haugen had also described a plan she had formed before the police officer knocked on her window. She said she had intended to bury Mast's body in a remote area and then leave for Washington state. She said she would not have gone to the police. Haugen was charged with deliberate homicide under Montana law, which is the knowing and intentional killing of another person. In Montana, deliberate homicide carries a sentencing range of up to 100 years in prison. She was represented by public defender Gregory Pascal. In April 2016, Haugen pleaded guilty to deliberate homicide in Yellowstone County District Court. There was no trial. The guilty plea acknowledged what the court documents already established: that she had strangled Robert Mast in that parking lot and held his airways shut until he was dead. The sentencing hearing took place in June 2016 before Yellowstone County District Judge Gregory Todd. The prosecution recommended 65 years. Pascal, for the defense, presented mental health testimony about Haugen's extensive history of abuse and trauma, arguing that her background had left her psychologically predisposed to a kind of submission to perceived requests for violence, and that the killing had to be understood in that context. A licensed clinical professional counselor named Lisa Matovich-Brook testified about Haugen's documented history of victimization. She described Haugen's childhood, the abuse from her abusive ex-partner, and stated that Haugen had described the act of killing Mast as a dissociative experience, telling Matovich-Brook that it felt like she was floating above the car and not really doing it herself. Matovich-Brook characterized this as consistent with the dissociation patterns seen in severely traumatized individuals. Judge Todd, in his sentencing remarks, described Haugen as an intelligent person with a horrendous background of abuse. He did not dispute the documented trauma in her history, but he also described the crime as one that could not be reduced to a simple act of mercy or submission, and stated that everything the evidence showed pointed to Mast being someone whose death served Haugen's purposes rather than his own. He sentenced her to 60 years in prison at the Montana Women's Prison, declining the prosecution's recommendation of 65 years. Mindy Pendleton, who had raised Robert Mast from the age of 2, testified at the sentencing. She told the court that his life mattered. She said it mattered. She said it mattered to all of them. She said he was loved, and he loved well. She told the court that Mast had a girlfriend he planned to return to in Minnesota, that he trusted Haugen, and that was what killed him. She held up a photograph of Mast with his nieces and nephews for the court to see. Haugen spoke at the sentencing hearing and addressed Pendleton directly with an apology. She described Mast as the love of her life. She told the judge that the prosecution's recommendation of 65 years felt overwhelming, but that she deserved whatever she received. She said she could not bring Robbie back. The case was featured in the first episode of the second season of the Netflix documentary series I Am a Killer, which premiered on January 31, 2020. The episode presented Haugen's account of the relationship and the killing in a format that Pendleton and other members of Mast's family felt gave disproportionate weight to Haugen's version of events. Pendleton had written to the show's producers before it aired, urging them not to proceed, describing the process in terms that made clear she understood what a documentary centered on the killer's perspective would cost her family. The producers acknowledged the difficulty and proceeded. Pendleton refused to participate. She did not want to share her memories of Robert with the person who had killed him. In January 2025, Haugen appeared before a Montana parole board seeking clemency. At that hearing, she walked back the statement she had made in the interrogation recording. the statement about wanting to kill someone with her bare hands. She told the board she was haunted by it, and that she had said it to stop the detective from pressing her, and had not meant it. She said she was not looking for an opportunity, and would never purposefully inflict harm on another person. Hallam, the detective who conducted the interrogation, appeared at the same hearing and told the board that Haugen had made multiple other callous statements in that same recording, in addition to the one about her bare hands, including the detail about planning to bury the body. He stated that Lindsay Haugen did not deserve clemency. Mast's family members gave statements and begged the board to deny the request. Pendleton told the board that her family lived in loss and grief daily. She said anything less than the full sentence diminished Robbie's existence and the people who loved him. The board denied the request. Lindsay Haugen is currently incarcerated at the Montana Women's Prison in Billings, where she has been held since her conviction in 2016. She is serving a 60-year sentence for deliberate homicide. Robert Glenn Mast was 25 years old. He had been passing through Billings on his way somewhere else. He had a skateboard-riding dinosaur tattooed on his right hand. He played guitar. His nieces and nephews heard a train and called out his name. He trusted a woman he had known for 26 days. His stepmother still has the marks on the wall that measured how tall he had grown. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next case is Shayna Hubers, a 21-year-old college student who shot her 29-year-old attorney boyfriend 6 times in his Kentucky apartment, then sat in the police interrogation room afterward and danced. Case 6. Shayna Hubers Ryan Carter Poston was born on December 30 of 1982 in Fort Mitchell, Kentucky, into a family with deep roots in the law. His grandfather, James Poston Sr., had practiced law for 54 years. His uncle, James Poston Jr., was also an attorney. Ryan followed the same path, completing an undergraduate triple major in political science, history, and geography at Indiana University, before earning his Juris Doctor from the Salmon P. Chase College of Law at Northern Kentucky University, which is located in Highland Heights, the same small suburb of Cincinnati, where he would later die. He worked as an attorney in Cincinnati after graduating, handling cases that he found meaningful, and, by the accounts of people who knew him professionally, taking on work for people who had limited resources because he thought it mattered. His family released a statement after his death describing him as bright, kind, principled, and caring. His father, Jay Poston, who would endure 6 years of legal proceedings before the case was finally resolved, described his son at a sentencing hearing in terms that made clear the depth of what had been taken. Ryan Poston had a chess set in his apartment, a love of the game that people who knew him mentioned consistently. He was 29 years old on October 12, 2012, and that evening he had plans to meet Audrey Bolte, the reigning Miss Ohio 2012, for drinks. They had connected through Facebook months earlier, and had been building toward an actual date. He got dressed and waited. Bolte waited at the bar. He never showed up. By the time she accepted he was not coming and went home, Ryan Poston was already dead on the floor of his condominium. Shayna Michelle Hubers was born on April 8, 1991, and was 19 years old when she first came to Ryan Poston's attention in March 2011. The encounter was, by Ryan's own account in testimony, relayed through people who knew him, a casual one. He was on Facebook and saw a photo of Hubers, who was a friend of his step-cousin, taken during a spring break trip to Daytona Beach. He sent her a friend request. They eventually met in person, began spending time together, and started an on-again, off-again relationship that continued for approximately 18 months. Hubers was studying psychology at the University of Kentucky at the time, and would later graduate with honours from that program and express ambitions to pursue a master's degree in school counselling. She was, by external appearances, academically driven and personable. The relationship between them was not stable. Ryan's friends began expressing concerns about Hubers relatively early in the relationship. describing her to him as strange, cold, and obsessive. He largely reassured them that things were fine and that he would end the relationship when it stopped working. What the friends described observing, and what later testimony confirmed, was that Hubers had developed an intensity around Poston that went well beyond normal attachment. She would show up at his condominium unannounced. When he did not respond to texts, she would appear in person. She sent him, by the prosecution's account at trial, anywhere from 50 to 100 text messages in a single day during periods of conflict. Friends of Poston who testified said they watched him try to exit the relationship on multiple occasions and found himself unable to make it stick, that Hubers would not accept it, and that he eventually, each time, re-engaged. Prosecutors argued at both trials that the night of October 12, 2012 had a specific trigger. The date with Audrey Bolte was not a secret. Hubers had found out about it. On the night Poston was supposed to meet Bolte, Hubers came to his apartment. They were in his living room. The prosecution's version of what happened next was that an argument broke out over the relationship and his intention to finally end it and go on this date, that Hubers shot him 6 times using his own registered handgun, that she waited after the initial shots, observed him still moving, and then fired additional rounds to, in her own words, re-lead to police that same night, put him out of his misery. The defence's version was that Poston became physically violent during the argument, that he grabbed her hair and jerked her head back so hard she thought her neck would snap, that he moved toward the handgun he kept in the apartment, that she reached it first and fired in a desperate act of self-defense. Ryan Poston was shot 6 times. 2 rounds struck his head, 3 struck his torso, 1 struck him in the back. When Highland Heights Police Department officers arrived at the condominium after Hubers called 911, they found him slumped on the floor between a table and a radiator. There was blood on the living room wall and pooled on the floor. Hubers was still in the apartment. She told the 911 dispatcher she had shot him in self-defense. She told the dispatcher he had thrown her across the room. The officers took Hubers to the station. What happened there, on camera over the hours that followed, became the most consequential evidence in the case against her. It was not forensic evidence. It was Hubers herself, alone in the interrogation room, on surveillance footage. She asked for an attorney after her Miranda rights were read, which was her right. And legally, that should have ended the questioning. But Hubers continued talking anyway, to officers, to herself, and to no one in particular, generating a recorded monologue that the prosecution would use against her in both trials. When she spoke with officers about the relationship, she described Ryan Poston as very vain, as someone who had talked about wanting rhinoplasty. She told them she had shot him right there, pointing at her nose. She said she gave him his nose job. She told officers she was not a murderer, that she had killed him in self-defense. And in the same stretch of conversation, she said she knew he was going to die or have a completely deformed face, suggesting an awareness of the consequence that cut directly against the panicked self-defense account. She said she did not think she deserved to go to prison. She said she felt her character should be looked at by people who knew them both, who could say she was a good person. When officers left the room, Hubers was alone with the camera. She began talking to herself in a continuous rambling stream. She said she did it. She said, yes, she did it. She said she could not believe she had done that. She said she was so good at acting. She hummed. She got up from her chair and paced. She stood against the wall and sang Amazing Grace. She danced, pirouetting in the interrogation room, snapping her fingers, repeating variations of I did it and I killed him. She contemplated aloud who might be called to testify at her trial. At one point she said of the question of whether anyone would want to marry her after this, not funny. The Highland Heights police chief, Bill Birkenhauer, was watching the live feed from another room. He later described what he observed as something he had never seen before in his career. Lead prosecutor Michelle Snodgrass, who prosecuted both trials, told an interviewer that she understood people behave abnormally in shock, but had never heard of someone pirouetting when they were in shock, or singing, or saw snapping their fingers and announcing they had done it. Hubers was charged with murder and held on a $3 million bond. The first trial took place in April 2015 in Campbell County Circuit Court before Judge Fred A. Stein. The prosecution built their case around the physical evidence, the interrogation video, and text messages that documented the relationship's volatility and Hubers' intensity. A cellmate named Cecily Miller testified that Hubers had spoken about the night of the killing in a way that Miller described as carefree, without the affect of someone speaking about a trauma. Hubers herself did not testify in the first trial. The jury deliberated for approximately 5 hours before returning a guilty verdict on April 23, 2015. Judge Stein, at sentencing in August 2015, described the killing as the most cold-blood act he had been associated with in the criminal justice system, and sentenced Hubers to 40 years in prison with parole eligibility only after 34 years had been served. The conviction was overturned on August 25, 2016, when it came to light that one of the jurors in the first trial had failed to disclose a prior felony conviction during jury selection. Under Kentucky law, convicted felons are not eligible to serve on criminal juries. The irregularity required a new trial, regardless of what it cost the Poston family to go through the process again. Ryan's father, Jay Poston, told a reporter as the retrial approached that if they had to do it 100 times, they would do it 100 times. The retrial began in August 2018 before Campbell County Circuit Court Judge Daniel Zala. The core evidence was the same. The interrogation footage was played again. The text messages were introduced again. This time, Hubers took the stand and testified over the course of several days. She told the jury she had feared Ryan Poston from the moment they met. She described the night of the killing as a culmination of what she characterized as sustained physical and emotional abuse at his hands. She said he had grabbed her hair and jerked her head back, and that she believed he was going to strangle her. She said she had reached the gun first and fired. The prosecution used Hubers' own statements from the interrogation room to counter this at every turn. The jury deliberated for less than 5 hours before finding her guilty of murder for the second time on August 28, 2018. The following day, the jury recommended a life sentence, an escalation from the 40 years recommended in the first trial. On October 18, 2018, Judge Zala followed the jury's recommendation and sentenced Shayna Hubers to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 20 years. Credit for time already served since her original arrest in December 2012 was applied, meaning her first parole hearing eligibility fell approximately 14 years from the date of sentencing. Ryan Poston's family released a statement after the second verdict. It said they embraced justice but did not feel joy. It described 6 long and heartbreaking years without their beloved Ryan. It said those who loved Ryan would move forward with the integrity, dignity and kindness that Ryan exemplified throughout his life. His father, Jay Poston, addressed the court at sentencing and spoke about the person his son had been and what 6 years of proceedings had done to the family. Shayna Hubers appealed the second conviction, arguing problems with venue, jury selection, and the admissibility of certain evidence. The Kentucky Supreme Court denied the appeal in September 2020, affirming both the conviction and the life sentence. She is currently incarcerated at the Kentucky Correctional Institute for Women in Pewee Valley, Kentucky. Ryan Carter Poston was 29 years old. He had a date that night with a woman he had been looking forward to meeting. He had a chess set in his apartment. He had a grandfather who had practiced law for 54 years, and a father who sat through every day of 2 trials across 6 years to make sure the record was complete. The condominium in Highland Heights where he died was dusty and untidy. The way a young man's apartment sometimes is when he is working hard and living fast, and expecting to have time to sort it out later. He did not have time. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next case is Ina Thea Kenoya, who poisoned her boyfriend of 10 years by lacing his sweet tea with antifreeze because she believed he was about to inherit $30 million and then leave her. Case 7. Ina Thea Kenoya Stephen Edward Riley Jr. was 51 years old and originally from California. He had 5 children from 2 previous marriages and had spent periods of his adult life working through difficulties that his family and acquaintances described in general terms without elaborating publicly. By the time he met Ina Thea Kenoya, both of them were living in circumstances that required rebuilding. The account given by Oxygen's documentary series about the case describes them as meeting at a homeless shelter and helping each other emerge from earlier, troubled times. They began a relationship in approximately 2013 and moved together to Minot, North Dakota, a small city of roughly 50,000 people located about 50 miles south of the Canadian border, to start a new life. By 2023, they had been together for approximately 10 years, living together in a shared home in Minot. Kenoya referred to herself as his wife. She had told detectives and neighbours, and apparently anyone who would listen, that she was his common-law wife, and that everything they had was shared between them. She believed that designation gave her legal standing. She was wrong about that in North Dakota. And the fact that she was wrong about it is part of what killed him. At some point in 2023, Stephen Riley began receiving communications from someone claiming to be a lawyer, representing the estate of a distant relative who had died overseas. The communications told Riley he was the sole beneficiary of an inheritance worth over $30 million. All he needed to do was meet with the attorney to sign the relevant paperwork, and the funds would transfer. This kind of advance fee or inheritance fraud scheme is extremely common and targets people across all demographics, promising life-changing sums of money in exchange for cooperation with a process that never actually delivers anything. Riley and Kenoya both believed it was real, they told friends. Riley began making plans. He spoke to people around him about what he intended to do once the money arrived. And one of the things he apparently told people, or at least one of the things that people who knew him told police, was that once he had the inheritance, he was going to leave Ina Kenoya. A neighbour named Rebecca Mello, who shared information with police about the couple's recent history, described to investigators what she had observed and heard in the time leading up to Riley's death. She said she felt Kenoya had overheard things that Stephen had said, that it had got the best of her, and that Kenoya had become very resentful at the thought of him having that money, and then leaving her and her having nothing. She said Kenoya thought those things she had overheard were going to happen, and so she wanted to get that money before anyone else. That framing, provided by someone who lived near the couple and watched the dynamic in those final weeks, describes the emotional architecture of what happened next with more precision than any legal document. Kenoya's friends and acquaintances also told police something that became significant in the investigation. Multiple people said that in the period before Riley's death, Kenoya had made comments about poisoning him with antifreeze. These were not comments made during the investigation. They were comments made before anyone was dead, before any lab results had come back, before any of this had become a murder case. People in Kenoya's orbit had heard her say it. They remembered it. When Riley died and police began asking questions, they told investigators what they had heard. On September 3, 2023, Riley and a group of friends went to the Minot airport for the meeting with the attorney, who had been corresponding with him about the inheritance. The attorney did not arrive. Riley had been there for similar meetings that also produced nothing, because the whole enterprise was a fraud. But Riley and Kenoya continued to believe the inheritance was coming. According to investigators and the account provided in the Oxygen documentary, Kenoya had admitted to detectives that she had been making Riley sweet tea throughout the day of the airport meeting. The prosecution's conclusion, supported by the forensic evidence, was that the antifreeze was in the sweet tea. At the airport, while waiting for an attorney who was never going to appear, Riley began feeling ill. Friends who were with him said he was experiencing stomach pain, that he was unsteady on his feet, and that he said he felt like he was drunk. His friends wanted to take him to see a doctor or go to a hospital. Kenoya, who was present, said no. She had what investigators described as a claimed background in medical training, and she told the group that Riley was suffering from heat stroke and just needed to go home and rest. She was insistent. They took him home. Riley's condition continued to deteriorate at the house. His friends remained concerned. The following day, September 4, an ambulance was called and paramedics arrived at the couple's Minute home to find Riley unconscious on the floor. He was transported to Trinity Hospital in Minor, and his condition was severe enough that he was airlifted to Kai Alexius Hospital in Bismarck, the state capital, approximately 100 miles away. He never regained consciousness. On September 5, 2023, Stephen Edward Riley Jr. was pronounced dead at the hospital in Bismarck. He was 51 years old. The autopsy results provided the case. Forensic examination found toxic levels of ethylene glycol in Riley's blood. Ethylene glycol is the primary active ingredient in most commercial antifreeze products. It is colourless and odourless, but has a slightly sweet taste, which made it historically an accidental poisoning risk, and which also makes it functionally easy to conceal in a sweet drink if a person is not specifically looking for it. The manner of death was determined to be homicide. The cause of death was ethylene glycol poisoning. Riley's friends and family contacted Minot police immediately after his death with their concerns about Kenoya. They were specific. They told investigators she had made comments about poisoning Riley with antifreeze in the period before his death. They also told investigators something that was separately notable at the hospital. While Riley was still being treated, and before any autopsy had been completed, and before any medical professional had communicated anything about the nature of his condition to Kenoya, Kenoya had made comments suggesting he had been poisoned with antifreeze. She had said it before anyone told her. That detail was included in the police affidavit and referenced in court documents. A search warrant was executed at the couple's home. Investigators found what they were looking for. A glass Coors Light bottle and a plastic mug both had traces of suspected antifreeze. An old Windex bottle, repurposed and found in the living room, contained a bright green liquid that investigators believed was antifreeze. Gallon-sized containers of the substance were also found in the garage. Kenoya had admitted to making Riley sweet tea throughout the day of the airport meeting. She had admitted to being aware of the inheritance. She had admitted to believing she was entitled to a share of the inheritance as his common-law wife. When investigators informed her that North Dakota does not recognize common-law marriages, and that she would not in fact have been legally entitled to any portion of any inheritance Riley received, she went, in the words of one detective, ballistic. When presented with the full body of evidence investigators had assembled, she became, by multiple accounts, explosively angry. Minot Police Department arrested Ina Thea Kenoya on October 30, 2023, and charged her with one count of Class AA felony murder, the most severe homicide charge available under North Dakota law. Class AA felony murder carries a maximum sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. She was held in the Ward County Jail on a $1 million bond. The case did not go to trial. In May 2024, as a trial date approached, Kenoya entered a guilty plea. At the hearing before Ward County District Court, when the judge asked if she had a statement, she leaned toward the microphone and said a single word: guilty. The plea was entered pursuant to an agreement between Kenoya's attorney Tyler Morrow and Ward County State's attorney Rosa Larson, under which prosecutors and defense counsel jointly recommended a sentence of 50 years with 25 years to be served and 25 years suspended. The sentencing hearing took place on October 16, 2024, before North Central District Court Judge Richard Hagar. Riley's sister, Stephanie Gonzalez, and his son, Ryan Riley, appeared by video and gave victim impact statements. Gonzalez's statement was extensive and deliberately unsparing. She told the court that Kenjoya was an exact reflection of the home she had kept and lived in, which she described as vile, filthy, disgusting, embarrassing, gross, full of feces, and pure trash. She said she was still processing how Kenoya could take her brother's life, lie to her nephew about the circumstances of his death, and then attempt to sell Riley's vehicle while he was not yet in the ground. She concluded with the observation that has become the line most associated with this case in public accounts. As so many other families of victims often feel, the punishment should fit the crime. But lucky for you, the Department of Corrections does not serve antifreeze in your iced tea. Ryan Riley, Stephen's son, spoke about losing his father and about the impact of the loss on the family. His statement described not just grief, but the specific anger of a family that had been lied to and manipulated in the period surrounding his father's death, that had watched the woman who killed him deny medical attention to him while he was dying, and that had then been left to piece together what actually happened. Judge Hagar accepted the joint sentencing recommendation. He sentenced Einathia Kenoya to 50 years in prison, structured as 25 years to be served, 25 years suspended, and 10 years of supervised probation following her release. She also received credit for 353 days of time already served since her October 2023 arrest, and was ordered to pay $3,455 in restitution to Riley's family. Kenoya made no statement at the sentencing. Investigators reflecting on the case described it as extremely complex, given that the primary evidence was circumstantial and would have required persuading a jury beyond a reasonable doubt that Kenoya had placed antifreeze in Riley's drinks. The guilty plea removed that requirement. The Minot Police Department's investigations commander, Captain Dale Plessis, said in his post-arrest statement that he thanked everyone who had provided information that helped investigators piece the case together. It was the people who had heard Kenoya's comments about antifreeze before Riley died, the neighbours who observed the relationship, the friends at the airport who watched a man become violently ill and then watched Kenoya prevent him from getting medical help, who made the case possible. Einathia Kenoya is currently incarcerated at the Dakota Women's Correctional and Rehabilitation Center in Mandan, North Dakota. She will serve 25 years before any parole consideration. Stephen Edward Riley Jr. had 5 children. He was 51 years old. He had been in a relationship with the same woman for 10 years and had built a life with her in Minot, North Dakota. He received emails about an inheritance that was never going to materialize from someone who was running a scheme he could not see through. He believed in it completely. He went to an airport 3 times to meet a lawyer who was never going to arrive. On the day the meeting finally seemed like it was about to happen, he drank sweet tea his girlfriend had made for him. By the following morning, he was unconscious on his floor. His sister is still processing how someone could do what was done to him. His son spoke about it over a video screen in a courtroom in Minot. His father's car was nearly sold before his body was cold. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next case is Shay's. Shay Groves, who had framed photographs of serial killers on her bedroom wall, watched true crime documentaries to learn how to construct an alibi, and then stabbed her boyfriend to death as he slept. Case 8. Shay Groves Frankie Fitzgerald was 25 years old and lived in the Portsmouth and Havant area of Hampshire, England. He had 2 children. His family described him publicly in the terms that families use when they have lost someone young and suddenly. A shining light, kind and beautiful, loved by everyone, missed by everyone. His father, Barry Fitzgerald, read a statement at the sentencing hearing in which he said he was still grieving and was not sure he would ever get over it. He said he wanted to tell Frankie directly, through the statement, that he loved him, and that his shining light would always be in their hearts. Frankie Fitzgerald was the father of 2 children who, in the words of the judge who sentenced his killer, would never get to know their daddy. He was 25 years old. He had no known history of violence toward women. When Shay Groves decided on the night of July 17, 2022, to go into the bedroom where he was sleeping and put a dagger in his throat, he was asleep. Shay Groves was born in January 1996 and grew up in Havant, a town on the south coast of England near Portsmouth. Her childhood involved, by the accounts given at and around her trial, significant trauma. Those who spoke about her early life described physical and sexual abuse that had followed her into adulthood. She was partially deaf from a young age and began wearing a hearing aid at around 11 years old. She described being bullied in school for being different, targeted for the hearing aid, and marginalized for a sensibility and aesthetic that put her outside the mainstream of what her peers considered normal. She gravitated toward dark imagery, heavy music, and what she later described as pagan spirituality. And she was, by multiple accounts, isolated as a result of those interests, rather than celebrated for them. By adulthood, she had a daughter of her own. She lived on Botley Drive in Lee Park, Havant, in a home that Hampshire police later photographed and released images from following the trial. Those photographs showed the interior of a specific kind of domestic space. Framed portraits of serial killers hung on the bedroom walls. Among them were photographs of Myra Hindley, the British woman who, with Ian Brady, murdered 5 children in the 1960s, and Peter Sutcliffe, known as the Yorkshire Ripper, who murdered 13 women between 1975 and 1980. There were also images of Ted Bundy and Jeffrey Dahmer. There was a coffin-shaped bookcase. The bookshelf contained books about notorious criminals, including volumes about Charles Bronson, who is described in the British press as the country's most notorious prisoner and has been incarcerated almost continuously since 1974. Alongside the books and the photographs were weapons, knives, Viking axes, and a Celtic dagger that Groves had purchased, court testimony established, for use in what she described as pagan rituals, as a tool for strengthening spiritual connections. She kept the Celtic dagger under her pillow, or close to her bed. She watched true crime documentaries extensively, and had accumulated, over years of sustained interest in the genre, a body of knowledge about how murders were investigated, how crime scenes were processed, and how alibis were constructed and dismantled. The prosecution argued at trial that this knowledge was not incidental to what happened in July 2022. It was directly applied. In February 2022, Shay Groves met Frankie Fitzgerald at a pub in the area. She approached him. She found him attractive and later described the connection as immediate. They lived close to each other. Both of them had children. The relationship developed quickly. The dynamic between them, as described at trial through testimony and evidence, was one marked from the beginning by what the judge at sentencing called a dangerous dynamic, characterized by rough sex, cocaine, and alcohol. The two of them shared a mutual interest in BDSM, and a camera had been set up in Groves's bedroom to record their sexual encounters. This became directly relevant during the trial, because Groves used some of that footage in an attempt to frame Fitzgerald as her abuser, and the prosecution argued that the original recordings contradicted the edited versions she presented. The prosecution's account of the relationship was that Groves became intensely attached to Fitzgerald and developed a possessiveness around him that drove the eventual killing. Prosecutor Stephen Perrion KC told the jury that she was obsessed with him, specifically with his performance in their sexual relationship, and that the obsession was the engine of the jealousy that killed him. Perrion told the jury that the killing of Frankie Fitzgerald was very likely a crime of passion driven by her jealousy. The specific trigger for the night of July 17, 2022, was discovered by Groves when she went through Fitzgerald's phone while he was sleeping. She found messages in which he had been in contact with someone she believed to be a 13-year-old girl on Facebook. This discovery produced the rage that preceded the attack. What Groves did not know, and what Mr. Justice Kerr established in his sentencing remarks, was that the girl in question was not 13. She was 17. and Fitzgerald had in fact already blocked her, having been told her age before Groves ever looked at the phone. There was nothing in the actual exchange to justify what Groves believed she had found. She had not found evidence of anything. She had misread a situation and killed a sleeping man over it. The sequence of events immediately after Groves discovered the messages and went into the bedroom is documented through what followed. She picked up the Celtic dagger from near her bed. Fitzgerald was asleep. The first strike was to his neck, cutting a major artery and damaging a major vein. Medical assessment at trial established that the injuries from the Swedish wound alone were first so severe that even immediate emergency intervention could not have saved him. Groves did not call for emergency help. She continued stabbing. In total, Fitzgerald was stabbed 22 times, wounds to the neck and wounds to the chest, delivered in a sequence that ended only when she stopped. After the attack, Groves did not call the emergency services. She called her friend Vicky Batup on a video call, according to Batup's account, which she gave to police, and which formed part of the trial record. Groves showed her Fitzgerald's body during the call, and was giggling as she did so. She told Batup, "I've done him." She also told her, "I just lost it. I just lost it. I picked up my dagger and stabbed him in the neck." It was Batup who called the police, alerting a call handler to what Groves had shown and told her. Police were called to the property on Botley Drive on July 17, 2022, following the report that a man was believed to be seriously injured at the address. Officers arrived and found Frankie Fitzgerald dead. What came next demonstrated the extent to which Groves had absorbed the true crime material she had consumed. She constructed a counter-narrative. She presented herself to investigators as Fitzgerald's victim rather than his killer. She used the footage from the bedroom camera, editing it to remove the context that established the encounters as consensual, and presenting it to Batup in a way designed to make it appear that Fitzgerald had been sexually violent toward her. The prosecution established at trial that the original unedited footage did not show what the edited version implied. She also cleaned the crime scene. The prosecution argued, citing the body of knowledge she had accumulated through years of watching murder documentaries, that she had deliberately constructed a false narrative, created a false alibi, and cleaned the scene because she understood from the material she had studied how investigations worked, and what she needed to eliminate or obscure. Groves was charged with murder and pleaded not guilty. The trial began at Winchester Crown Court and lasted 5 weeks. The prosecution presented the physical evidence, the video call to Batup, Batup's testimony, the forensic evidence from the scene, the original unedited footage, and the pattern of deliberate obfuscation that followed the killing. The defense maintained the self-defense and victim narrative that Groves had constructed, arguing that she had been abused by Fitzgerald and that the circumstances of his death needed to be understood in that context. The jury convicted Shay Groves of murder on February 17, 2023. The sentencing hearing took place on February 20, 2023 at Winchester Crown Court before Mr. Justice Kerr. Barry Fitzgerald's victim impact statement was read to the court. He said he was still grieving. He said he was not sure he would ever get over it. He told his son he loved him, and that his shining light would always be in their hearts. The family's full statement described Frankie as a kind and beautiful person who left behind 2 children who would never get to know their daddy. Mr. Justice Kerr addressed Groves directly in his sentencing remarks. He told her she had robbed Frankie's family and loved ones of their son and their brother, and had robbed his 2 children of their father. He said she had ended his life in his mid-20s and had blighted the lives of his family for decades to come. He described the relationship's dangerous dynamic and its marking by rough sex, cocaine, and alcohol. He described Groves as a manipulative, possessive, and jealous woman. He said she had lost her temper and acted on impulse. He said she loved the man she killed and killed the man she loved. He sentenced her to life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 23 years. Groves appeared in court for the sentencing wearing a jacket with a pentagram drawn on the back of it. She remained expressionless in the dock as the sentence was delivered. After the verdict, Hampshire police released the photographs of Groves's bedroom, the framed serial killer portraits, the Celtic dagger, the coffin-shaped bookcase, the collection of weapons. Detective Chief Inspector Nicola Burton, who was the senior investigating officer in the case, said publicly that it had been a shocking and sustained attack, and that the sentence was appropriate. She said thoughts remained with Frankie's family. Shay Groves is currently serving her life sentence at a women's prison in England. Under the terms of her minimum sentence, she will not be eligible for parole consideration until she has served 23 years, which means the earliest she could be considered for release is 2046. She will be 50 years old by that point. Frankie Fitzgerald was 25 years old. He was asleep when the dagger went into his throat. He had 2 children. He had blocked a girl on Facebook when she told him her age. He had a father who sat in a courtroom in Winchester and said through a written statement that he loved his son and did not know if he would ever stop grieving. His family called him a shining light. His killer went into his bedroom in the dark and made sure that light went out. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The final case is Grishma from Kerala, India, who poisoned her boyfriend Sharon Raj with a herbicide mixed into a drink and watched him die over 11 days, knowing exactly what she had put inside him. Case 9. Grishma note before this case begins. Grishma's death sentence, handed down by the Additional District Sessions Court in Neyatankara in January 2025, is currently under appeal at the Kerala High Court. The court admitted her appeal in February 2025 and directed the state of Kerala to file a response. As of May 2026, the High Court has not yet issued a ruling on that appeal. The conviction itself stands. The sentence is under review. Every fact in this section is drawn from the court record, police statements, and verified reporting. Where the legal status is unresolved, that is stated plainly. Sharon Raj was 23 years old and lived in Parasala, a town on the outskirts of Thiruvananthapuram in Kerala, India, close to the Tamil Nadu border. He was a final year BSc radiology student studying at a college in Kanyakumari district. His family described him after his death as a vibrant young man, someone whose presence they felt immediately when it was gone. His parents were at the courthouse when the judgment was delivered in January 2025, and told reporters that justice had been done. His dying declaration, recorded while he was still alive, and still receiving treatment in the ICU of the Thiruvananthapuram Medical College, contained a detail that the court referenced repeatedly. Sharon Raj told the people taking his statement that he had not suspected Grishma would poison him. He died not knowing why she had done it, or perhaps knowing and not wanting to say. He was 23 years old. His organs failed over 11 days. He was conscious for part of that time. Grishma, whose full name is recorded in court documents as SS Grishma, and who is also referred to by the name Srikutty in those documents, was 22 years old at the time of the poisoning, and 24 at the time she was sentenced. She lived in Ramavamanchirai, in Kanyakumari district of Tamil Nadu, on the border of Kerala, and was at the time of the relationship pursuing a postgraduate degree in literature. She had completed her undergraduate work with distinction, and was described by people around her, including by the court in its 586-page judgment, as academically brilliant. The court used the phrase brilliant criminal to describe what she became with those abilities. She was her parents' only daughter. Sharon and Grishma met during a bus journey and began a relationship in October 2021. They were students at the same institution in Kanyakumari. The relationship lasted approximately a year before the circumstances that ended it began. Both of them had agreed at some point during the relationship that they would marry each other. That agreement, and what happened to it, drove everything that followed. In February 2022, Grishma's family arranged her engagement to another man. His name was Sathish. He was in military service, posted with the Indian Army, from Nagercoil in Tamil Nadu. The engagement ceremony took place on March 4, 2022. The arrangement was made by Grishma's family, without Sharon's knowledge and, according to the evidence presented at trial, without Grishma initially telling Sharon directly. The relationship between Sharon and Grishma did not end when the engagement happened. What happened instead, according to the court's findings, was that Grishma feigned continued love for Sharon, revived the relationship with him in May 2022, and made him believe she would still marry him. During the months that followed, the two of them continued to see each other. They travelled together in July 2022. The court record notes specific journeys they took together in Tamil Nadu in July 2022, checking into rooms together, taking photographs at various locations. Whatever Grishma was telling Sharon during those months, the court found that she was simultaneously planning to end the relationship in a permanent way. Because Sharon would not accept that it was over, the prosecution established that Grishma had conducted digital research into slow-acting poisons before the killing. She searched on Google specifically for information about paraquat, a highly toxic herbicide used commercially as a weed killer, and banned for residential use in many countries, precisely because of its extreme lethality. The specific detail that investigators and the prosecution emphasized was that Grishma's research identified paraquat as a substance whose presence in a body could not be detected in standard examination if more than 24 hours had passed since ingestion. This was not incidental knowledge. It was the operational conclusion of a deliberate research process. She was not simply looking for a way to end the relationship. She was looking for a poison that would kill and then disappear from detection. Deputy Superintendent of Police K.Y. Johnson, speaking publicly after the investigation, stated that the accused had searched on Google about slow poisoning, come to know about paraquat, and used it because its presence could not be identified in an examination carried out after 24 hours. He acknowledged that scientific investigation had nonetheless revealed it. The court record also established that October 14, 2022 was not Grishma's first attempt to poison Sharon Raj. In August 2022, she had mixed paracetamol tablets into fruit juice and offered it to him. He declined to drink it because it tasted bitter. That attempt failed. She then continued the relationship for 2 more months, researched a more effective method, and tried again. On October 14, 2022, Grishma contacted Sharon and arranged for him to come to her home. Sharon travelled there with a friend named Rajin. The court judgment describes the sequence of events on that morning. Sharon called Rajin at 10 in the morning, and the two of them arrived at Grishma's house together, with Sharon driving his motorcycle and Rajin as a pillion rider. At some point during the visit, Grishma gave Sharon an Ayurvedic tonic. She told him it was something she herself drank regularly. He drank it. The tonic was laced with paraquat. When he showed signs of discomfort, she also gave him a bottled juice. He had unknowingly consumed paraquat in 2 separate drinks. He and Rajin then left the house, and Sharon rode home on his motorcycle. By the time Sharon reached home, he was vomiting. His parents, alarmed by the severity and persistence of it, took him to Parasala Government Hospital. His condition appeared to stabilise initially. He was allowed to return home. On October 17, 3 days after the poisoning, his health deteriorated sharply. He was admitted to Thiruvananthapuram Medical College. The treating doctors, examining the pattern of organ damage, determined that he had consumed an acidic substance that was causing systematic destruction of his internal organs. The head of internal medicine at Thiruvananthapuram Government Medical College, Dr. Aruna R., testified at trial that even a small dose of 15 millilitres of paraquat is fatal, and that there is no antidote for paraquat poisoning. Once it enters the body at a lethal dose, the outcome is death. Sharon underwent dialysis. He received sustained treatment. His organs continued to fail. On October 25, 2022, 11 days after Grishma gave him the drink she described as something she drank herself, Sharon Raj died of cardiac arrest caused by multiple organ failure. He was 23 years old. Sharon's family had suspected from very early in his hospitalization that something was wrong beyond an ordinary illness. His dying declaration, recorded while he was still conscious enough to give one, stated that he did not suspect Grishma had poisoned him. His family's suspicion and the forensic investigation diverged from that statement. The autopsy and toxicological testing identified paraquat in his system. Grishma was not immediately arrested. In the weeks following Sharon's death, she was questioned by police. She maintained her innocence and, according to investigators, initially played the role of a grieving partner. The investigation involved detailed digital forensics and scientific analysis of her search history and of the substances found through the investigation. In November 2022, she was brought in for detailed questioning. During that interrogation, she confessed. Shortly after confessing, she attempted to kill herself by consuming a disinfectant at the police station. She was hospitalized and survived. She was arrested on charges of murder, abduction with intent to commit murder, administering poison with intent to harm life, and obstructing justice through false information. Her mother Sindhu and her maternal uncle Nirmalakumaran Nair were also named as accused, with the uncle specifically charged with destroying evidence. The trial took place before additional District Sessions Court Judge Am Bashir in Nayatinkara. The judgment, which ran to 586 pages, found Grishma guilty on all material charges. It found her uncle Nirmalakumaran Nair guilty under the section relating to destruction of evidence. It acquitted her mother Sindhu. The court, in its findings, concluded that the murder was a well-planned, premeditated act committed through a deliberate exploitation of Sharon's trust and his continued love for Grishma. It found that Sharon had been entirely unaware of Grishma's plan and had gone to her home believing the relationship was still intact, or at least that she still cared for him. The court classified the case as one of the rarest of rare, the legal threshold in Indian law for the imposition of the death penalty, reserving capital punishment for crimes of exceptional depravity and premeditation. At the sentencing phase, Grishma's defense sought leniency. They cited her academic achievements, her lack of any prior criminal history, and the fact that she was her parents' only daughter. The court rejected each of these arguments. On January 20, 2025, Judge Bashir sentenced Grishma to death. She is considered to be the youngest woman in Kerala to have received capital punishment. Her uncle was sentenced to 3 years in prison, in addition to the death sentence for murder. Grishma received a sentence of 17 years imprisonment and a fine of 150,000 rupees for the other convictions relating to abduction, poisoning, and obstruction of justice. Sharon Rogers' parents were in the courtroom when the judgment was delivered. They told reporters that justice had been done. Grishma filed an appeal to the Kerala High Court. On February 6, 2025, a division bench of the Kerala High Court admitted the appeal and issued notice to the state of Kerala to file a response. The court also suspended the 3-year sentence of her uncle, pending the appeal hearing. As of May 2026, the High Court appeal is ongoing. The death sentence has not been carried out and will not be while the appeal remains active. The conviction is not currently under challenge in terms of the guilty finding itself, only the sentence. That status may change as the appeal develops. What is settled in the public record is that on October 14, 2022, Grishma gave Sharon Raj a drink she had poisoned and then watched him leave on his motorcycle, vomiting before he reached home, and dying in an ICU 11 days later. Sharon Raj was 23 years old. He was studying radiology and had plans to practice medicine. He had fallen in love with someone on a bus journey and had stayed in love when that was no longer safe to do. He did not suspect, even in his final days, that she had put something in the drink. His parents heard that detail at trial and carried it home with them. His dying declaration is part of the court record. His last words about her said he never thought she would do it. Grishma researched a poison that she believed would disappear from the body before anyone could find it. But the next case involves a woman whose method left no room for ambiguity at all. She shot him twice in the head in the apartment where their children slept. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Case 10. Nicole Adimando, September 27, 2017, was an ordinary Sunday in Poughkeepsie, New York, until shortly before 2:30 in the morning, when a police officer noticed a car stopped in front of a green light on Taft Haven Avenue and found a young mother sitting inside it with two sleeping toddlers in the back seat, telling him she had just shot her boyfriend. A note on what this case is and what it is not. Nicole Adimando killed Christopher Grover. That fact is not in dispute. She admitted it at the scene. She admitted it at trial. The conviction for second-degree murder was upheld on appeal. What was disputed across years of legal proceedings by the people who spent those years assembling evidence was the context in which she did it, and what that context should mean for how the courts treated her. This section sets out both sides of that dispute using the public record. The conviction stands. The sentence was reduced. She has been released. All of that is documented. Where the two sides of this case remain in genuine contested territory, that is stated directly. Christopher Grover was 21 years old when he met Nicole Adimando in 2008. They were both working as gymnastics coaches at the same gymnasium, and the relationship that developed between them would last 9 years and produce 2 children before the night it ended with a gun. Grover was, by the account of his family and friends, a popular and well-regarded gymnastics coach in the Poughkeepsie area who worked at Mr. Todd's Gymnastics. He had graduated from Red Hook High School in 2006. His family, after his death and throughout the legal proceedings that followed, maintained consistently that Adimando's claims of abuse were false and that he had never harmed her. His mother, Gail, released a statement calling the eventual appellate decision to reduce Adimando's sentence a slap in the face. Grover's family had people who loved him and who believed, and continue to believe, that what happened on the night of September 28, 2017 was murder, not survival. Nicole Adimando was born on November 19, 1988, in Poughkeepsie, New York. She worked as a preschool teacher before leaving her job when she became pregnant with her and Grover's first child in 2012. Their son was born that year. In 2015, their daughter was born. By the fall of 2017, the 3 of them were living with Grover in a 3-bedroom basement apartment on the east side of Poughkeepsie. Adimando described in testimony, and through the documentation presented on her behalf, a relationship in which abuse had begun in the early years and escalated substantially over the course of the 9 years they were together. She described physical beatings, sexual violence including rape, and a sustained pattern of control and intimidation that she said left her unable to leave. Her sister, Michelle Horton, who later wrote a memoir about the case called Dear Sister, described seeing evidence of bruising on Adimando over the years and accepting the explanations she was given for it, not understanding until after the shooting how severe the situation had been. What gave Adimando's account an unusual level of documented corroboration relative to many self-defense claims in similar cases was the institutional record that existed before the night of the shooting. The town of Poughkeepsie Police Department had records describing her as a victim in a high-risk domestic relationship, with Grover named as the suspect, dating from a report logged in November 2015. A domestic violence risk assessment administered by her social services worker placed her in the highest category for risk of homicide by an intimate partner. The Dutchess County Department of Health's Sexual Assault Forensic Examiner Program, the New York State Office of Victim Services, the Domestic Violence Agency Grace Smith House, and the Family Services of Poughkeepsie had all, at various points, identified Adimando as a survivor of physical or sexual assault. Child Protective Services had flagged her as an at-risk woman. Journalist Rachel Louise Snyder, whose long-form reporting on domestic violence had included a decade of fieldwork, and who authored the book No Visible Bruises, described Adimando's abuse in a piece for The New Yorker as among the most extreme she had encountered in a decade of reporting on the subject. Adimando's defense also presented evidence that videos of the abuse had been uploaded to a pornography website under a username linked to Grover, and that law enforcement had witnessed this material. Much of this evidence was suppressed at trial by the presiding judge, who ruled it inadmissible for the jury. The prosecution's case rested on a different construction of the events. Lead prosecutor Chana Kraus argued that Grover had been asleep on the couch when Adimando shot him, and that close-range entry wounds supported the contention that she had placed the gun against his body before firing. Prosecutors argued that the shooting was a premeditated act, not a reactive one, and that Adimando had attempted to clean the scene afterward, and had initially given inconsistent accounts to police, which they characterized as consciousness of guilt. The Putnam County District Attorney Robert Tendy issued a statement asserting that everything pointed to the fact that Grover was asleep when Adimando killed him, and that there was no evidence he had ever abused her. He said the investigation had been exhaustive and had taken the abuse allegations seriously. The prosecution's position was that the abuse narrative had been constructed after the fact to justify a killing that had a different motive. The medical examiner found no proof that Grover was asleep at the moment he was shot. At approximately 2:16 in the morning on September 28, 2017, a Poughkeepsie police officer named Richard Cicilli was driving toward an unrelated call when he noticed a car stopped in front of a green light on Taft Avenue. He sounded his horn. Adimando got out of the car. Her 2 children were in the back seat, both of them asleep. She told the officer she had been in a fight with her partner. She told him she had shot him. She was cooperative with investigators from the beginning and never attempted to flee. Grover was found at the apartment with 2 gunshot wounds to the head and neck. He was dead. The Dutchess County Grand Jury indicted Adimando in June 2018 on 4 counts: second-degree murder, first-degree manslaughter, second-degree manslaughter, and second-degree criminal possession of a weapon. The trial took place in March 2019 in the Dutchess County Court of Judge Edward McLaughlin. Adimando testified in her own defense over the course of several days and described the relationship in full, including specific acts of violence and sexual abuse, and the threats Grover had made that she said convinced her that if she tried to leave, he would kill her or take the children. Her social worker, Sarah Caprioli, testified and described the risk assessment and the documentation she had assembled. Police and medical professionals testified about injuries they had observed on Adimando at various points during the relationship. The defense argued that she had acted under the justification doctrine, meaning that she believed she had to act to save her own life, and that this belief was reasonable given the circumstances. On April 12, 2019, the jury unanimously found Adimando guilty of second-degree murder and second-degree criminal possession of a weapon. The other counts were dismissed. In September 2019, they requested that she be sentenced under New York's newly enacted Domestic Violence Survivors Justice Act, which had been signed into law that year and which authorized judges to impose reduced sentences when the abuse a defendant had suffered was a significant contributing factor to the crime. Judge McLaughlin held a hearing, received additional professional testimony about the abuse, and declined to apply the divicia. He stated in his sentencing remarks that Adimando had had opportunities to leave and may have, in his words, reluctantly consented to certain intimate acts. He called her a broken person. On February 11, 2020, he sentenced her to 19 years to life in prison, plus 5 years of post-release supervision for the weapons possession charge to run concurrently. Adimando appealed through a pro bono team from the law firm Sullivan and Cromwell. The appeal was argued before a panel of the New York State Supreme Court's Appellate Division, Second Department, in April 2021. On July 14, 2021, the Appellate Court issued its ruling. It upheld the second-degree murder conviction. It did not reverse the guilty verdict. What it did do, in language described by domestic violence law advocates as a landmark, was issue a sharp rebuke of the trial court's sentencing decision. The appellate court found that the trial judge had relied on thoroughly outmoded views of the impact of domestic violence, had misinterpreted the legislative intent of the Divestiture, and had failed to properly weigh the evidence of abuse that had been presented. The court found specifically that, contrary to the trial court's characterization, the abuse history was not undetermined. It found that Adimando had established, through her testimony, photographs and other evidence, that Grover had repeatedly abused her physically and sexually. The court resentenced her to 7.5 years, including time already served, plus 5 years of parole supervision. It was the first time an appellate court in New York had applied the Divestiture to reduce a sentence on appeal. Adimando's supporters had filed a clemency petition that gathered, by different counts, between 400,000 and 579,000 signatures. The petition was submitted to Governor Kathy Hochul in November 2021 and remained open without response for 2 years. Hochul granted clemency to other individuals during that period, but did not act on Adimando's application. Nicole Adimando was released from Bedford Hills Correctional Facility for Women on January 4, 2024. She had served nearly 6 years. Her children were 9 and 11 years old. They had been 2 and 4 when she was arrested. In a statement delivered from the courtroom following the 2019 verdict, before her sentence was determined, Adimando said, "I wish more than anything it ended another way. I wouldn't be in this courtroom right now, but I wouldn't be alive either. This is why women don't leave. They so often end up dead or where I'm standing alive, but still not free." Christopher Grover's mother, Gail, disputed the abuse claims throughout. His family described him as someone who had been robbed, who had 2 children who lost their father, and who had not received the justice they believed he was owed. The competing accounts of who he was and what the relationship contained have not been resolved and cannot be resolved through a legal proceeding that upheld a murder conviction while simultaneously reducing the sentence on the grounds that abuse was a significant contributing factor. The conviction is a matter of record. The abuse finding from the appellate court is a matter of record. Grover's family's rejection of that finding is also a matter of record. All 3 things are true simultaneously, and the case of Nicole Adimando, more than any other case in this video, resists the clean resolution that most true crime content offers. She killed the father of her children. She served 6 years. She has been home since January 2024. Her son and daughter, whose father is dead, and whose mother spent years in prison, are now living with her. What happened in that apartment? And why remains, in terms of the full truth of it, something only 2 people ever knew, and one of them is not alive to speak. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.